Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In a speech to the UN General Assembly in New York, President Trump has attacked the Iranian leadership, accusing it of sowing chaos, death and destruction across the Middle East. Donald Trump also accused China of unfair trading practices and said America was rejecting globalism in favour of patriotism. Our North America editor John Sopel reports.
When roads are closed for you and red lights really aren't a thing, there's not much excuse for being half an hour late for a journey of less than a mile. But Donald Trump missed his speaking slot this morning and made himself even later by stopping to talk to reporters on his way in. But when he did get underway, he went on a bit of a victory lap with unexpected consequences.
In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
The audience just giggled. US presidents are occasionally reviled, sometimes adored, but they're rarely laughed at. Last year he threatened to destroy North Korea and taunted Little Rocket Man. What a difference 12 months makes.
The missiles and rockets are no longer flying in every direction. Nuclear testing has stopped. I would like to thank Chairman Kim for his courage and for the steps he has taken, though much work remains to be done.
Today it was Iran in the crosshairs, America having pulled out of the nuclear deal. He called on nations to isolate Iran's rulers and support its people. Not quite a cry for regime change, but it's clear where he stands.
Iran's leaders plunder the nation's resources to enrich themselves and to spread mayhem across the Middle East and far beyond.
And this America First president rounded on OPEC, the International Criminal Court and the World Trade Organization. He justified his trade war against China and then set out a vision starkly at odds with the internationalist audience listening to him.
We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
And on immigration and to those refugees fleeing persecution, Donald Trump said, stay at home and make your own countries great again. That was heard in icy silence, and the only time his speech was interrupted was with laughter. You get the impression that the UN doesn't much like Donald Trump, and it's a sentiment that's probably reciprocated. John Sopel, BBC News, New York.
Now, while the Prime Minister will make her speech to the United Nations tomorrow, as we saw a few minutes ago, it was President Trump's turn this afternoon, and he rarely misses the chance for a bit of colourful hyperbole. He told his fellow world leaders that in less than 2 years in office, he had achieved more than almost any American administration in history. That was greeted with barely suppressed laughter. But there was nothing funny about what he had to say after that about Iran, a corrupt dictatorship with a bloody agenda spreading mayhem across the Middle East, he said.
With the Secret Service now deploying a brand new presidential limousine, Donald Trump travelled the 1 mile from his New York home to the UN.
His Excellency Donald Trump.
Within a few seconds of starting his speech, he encountered a reaction that took him by surprise.
My administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true.
World leaders openly laughing at his presidential boast.
Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
Then began his annual assault on multilateralism. This was America First, being preached to the most global body of them all.
We will never surrender America's sovereignty to an unelected, unaccountable global bureaucracy. America is governed by Americans. We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
His most scathing words were aimed at Tehran.
Iran's leaders sow chaos, death, and destruction.
Despite bitter European opposition to the move, Trump claims that abandoning the nuclear deal and cutting off the flow of money was the right decision.
The dictatorship used the funds to build nuclear-capable missiles, increase internal repression, finance terrorism, and fund havoc and slaughter.
President Hassan Rouhani fired back a short time later, accusing the Americans of trying to foment a coup by strangling the Iranian economy.
Unlawful unilateral sanctions in themselves constitute a form of economic terrorism and a breach of the right to development.
In contrast to his fiery rhetoric on Iran, Trump praised Kim Jong-un. What a change that is after his mockery of Little Rocket Man of a year ago.
The missiles and rockets are no longer flying in every direction. I would like to thank Chairman Kim for his courage and for the steps he has taken.
While the focus, of course, here is on diplomacy, especially Iran, Donald Trump will soon be leaving for battle-scarred Washington, and a crucial few days for his presidency. For his focus will now switch to a bitter fight over confirming a Supreme Court justice and a decision on whether to sack his Deputy Attorney General and dismantle the Russia investigation. All these are significant distractions for the president as he once more creates turmoil at the UN with his proudly nationalist agenda. Robert Moore, News at 10, New York.
Bill Cosby was sentenced to between 3 and 10 years in prison this evening for the drugging and aggravated assault of his one-time friend more than a decade ago. The judge ordered Cosby, who'd been out on bail, immediately to jail, explaining that the law would not allow different treatment because of who he is or was. The sentencing will be watched keenly by those who'd feared historical abuse would never result in a jail term, and comes as the country debates before a court of public opinion whether the president's choice for Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, should be investigated for assault he's accused of committing over 30 years ago. Assault he denies ever happened. He faced the cameras of Fox News last night in acceptance that that court of public opinion was perhaps already flexing its muscles.
It's Jimmy Kimmel Live!
The story of Brett Kavanaugh has now become the menu for late-night comedy. Jimmy Kimmel, the latest satirist to hang the Supreme Court nominee out to dry.
Another woman came forward to accuse Brett Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct. That makes 2 women. Only 12 more he can run for president.
And as liberal society makes its mind up about a man many had barely heard of some 6 months ago, their president doubles down in his support.
I think he's just a wonderful human being. I mean, I think it's horrible what the Democrats have done. It's a con game they're playing. They're really con artists. They're trying to convince, you know, they don't believe it themselves, okay? They know he's a high-quality person. They don't believe it. It's just resist and obstruct.
The nominee himself tried to clear his name on Fox News last night with a bizarre, perhaps irrelevant confession.
I've never sexually assaulted anyone. I did not have sexual intercourse or anything close to sexual intercourse in high school or for many years thereafter.
Through all these years that are in question, you were a virgin.
That's correct.
We believe survivors!
America is arguing about whether the attempted assaults happened, but also, critically, whether it even matters if they did. Does a lapsed decade or 3 give an accused man the space to move on, or should there be no statute of limitation?
Well, joining us now from Washington to discuss the latest on the Brett Kavanaugh allegations, Alexandra De Sanctis, a writer for the National Review, and Mark Joseph Stern, who's a legal analyst for Slate magazine. Very nice to have you both. If I can start with you, Alexandra De Sanctis. President Trump today accusing the Democrats of orchestrating a con game and accusing the women themselves of lying, called them messed up, drunk, a con artist. Wow.
I think this is an absolutely, absurd response from the president. That's not what we should be hearing from President Trump right now. I think he's turning this into a political game. But at the same time, I think the Democrats, many of the Democrats in the Senate have done the same thing. And the most important question is, what has actually happened? And we still don't know what's true. We don't know for sure that Brett Kavanaugh did these things, and we don't know that he didn't.
So what would you want to see then? You'd want to see a proper investigation getting to the bottom of this, and you would agree that he shouldn't be confirmed if this is proven true?
If it can be proven true, I think it's disqualifying, especially once you consider that he's now lied about it. If he did commit these acts, he's now said many times that he hasn't, and that's similarly disqualifying, I believe. But I don't think we have anywhere near enough evidence to know that yet, and I think we ought to have a hearing. You know, Dr. Ford's been given a chance to come to the Senate and testify, as has Deborah Ramirez, Kavanaugh's second accuser. Whether or not they take up the Senate on that is a different question. I think they should. And after that, I guess the Senate can decide.
Mark, so what do you do when everyone calls it a political game and that same insult is hurled backwards and forwards between the parties?
Well, I think you have to first recognize that there's no actual rush to put Judge Kavanaugh on the court, right? This court, the Supreme Court of the United States, functioned just fine with 8 members for more than a year after Justice Scalia's death. It can continue functioning with just 8 members while senators and hopefully, ideally, the FBI look into this allegation. There's no reason why the Senate can't tap the brakes here and say, you know what, we need to look into this seriously. We need to take these women seriously. It's true. We don't know whether what they say is true. We can't gauge the veracity of their allegations in the span of a week. So bring in the FBI, just as the Senate did when Clarence Thomas was accused of sexual misconduct nearly 30 years ago. Have FBI agents interview both the alleged victim, Kavanaugh, and other witnesses like Mark Judge. That takes time. There's no need to rush this hearing. And so if we're talking about political games, I agree that both parties have seized upon this as political football, but I think Republicans are the ones who are pushing this accelerated timeline that has a kind of arbitrary cutoff date that requires a hearing this weekend.
Alexandra, when you're writing about it in your article, you talk about the lack of a single eyewitness. You call some of the reporting slapdash and hearsay. It doesn't seem to, if you like, encompass the difficulty of accusations that will have been made about something that happened 30 years ago. So would you say that if you can't prove it with an eyewitness, then you shouldn't even be raking them up?
Well, I think, you know, women have a right to come forward, and if they are survivors of sexual assault, they have a right to be heard. But at the same time, I think there's a certain standard of reporting that requires, you know, if you're going to report a claim this old about a man who's up for the Supreme Court, nomination on the Supreme Court, you should at least be talking to someone who's sure of her memory. You know, the New Yorker story says that Deborah Ramirez spent 6 days trying to remember what actually happened, and she couldn't even remember for sure whether Kavanaugh was the one involved. She admitted that to friends. On top of that, we don't have eyewitnesses that even placed Kavanaugh at the party. And again, that's not to say he didn't do this. Maybe he did. I really am not sure. But that's not the kind of evidence that I'm looking for when I'm, you know, trying to evaluate claims like this.
Yeah, Mark, what should the standard of proof be? Because we're not talking about a criminal standard where you need proof beyond reasonable doubt. What is the standard that you think we should demand when we want to work out how to hold those in power to account?
Well, I don't think that there is a specific standard like beyond a reasonable doubt or preponderance of the evidence that we can use across the board here. The Constitution expressly differentiates Senate confirmations of judges from criminal trials and says that senators' only duty is to provide their advice and consent. So we have to ponder, what does advice and consent mean? And I think that it means each individual senator has to decide what he or she believes to be the best evidence and the best case for or against the judge, and that obviously includes allegations of sexual misconduct. Again, I don't know that there's some clear standard we can use here, but I do think that if a judge believes there is a likely possibility, there is a world in which these allegations are true, there is substantial corroboration of these allegations, they have a strong ring of truth to them, that a senator can say, you know what, this is a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the country. If I vote no on this confirmation, I'm not going to be doling out a punishment. I'm going to be withholding a privilege. And it is absolutely appropriate for a senator to withhold a privilege based on evidence that would not necessarily fly at an actual criminal trial.
Because Judge Kavanaugh feels he's being unfairly treated. To you, Alexandra, he went on Fox News last night because he said he didn't want the court of public opinion to be deciding who and who could not stand for high office. Do you think he's being treated unfairly?
You know, honestly, I do. And again, I'm not sure if these allegations are true. If they are true, that's obviously extremely disqualifying. It's a heinous thing for him to have done. It doesn't matter how long ago it was. But at the same time, if it's not true, consider how his reputation is being absolutely dragged through the mud. And if we're publishing claims that are not corroborated, if we're publishing claims that don't really even have kind of the substance from the accuser herself, the full memory there, I think it is unfair to this man, especially, the back and forth, the way the hearing has now been delayed, the political gamesmanship that has surrounded the entire process on both sides.
Mark, briefly to you, when it's called political gamesmanship, do you think these women will ever be believed in whatever hearing they're given?
Well, it does look like Ford's going to testify, and I think that however much we believe her, how much the Senate believes her, will rise or fall on the basis of her testimony. Our criminal system is built around testimony of victims, of eyewitnesses. Here she is going to lay out her case that this happened, that it traumatized her, and she's going to explain why she came forward. I think there is a very strong chance that she'll be extremely compelling and persuasive, and perhaps some senators on the fence will decide, I believe her over him. But we can't know until she testifies. Unfortunately, it does not look like Republican senators are willing to question her. They've instead hired a female prosecutor. I think that's less than ideal, though I understand the optics. But we're going to have to see the Senate or their staff come forward, try to gauge the truth of these allegations, and again, at the end of the day, just decide how best to provide their advice and whether or not this nominee deserves their consent.
We've run out of time, but thank you both very much indeed. Good to have you on.